Hey everybody, Bobby Murray here. Good morning to the Power Connection broadcast. I'm here with my friend Floyd Marinescu. Good morning, Floyd.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you. So if you're not, and we're going to have a great conversation around why universal basic income is necessary for a speedy and faster and better economic recovery. And Floyd is the Andrew Yang of Canada. He is the basic income expert and advocate and activist. I've been following his work for a long time. I think it's really great. I think it's really powerful, and even more prevalent now that we're kind of dealing with the pandemic in terms of the discussion that's been going on pretty much around the world. And if you are enjoying the Power Connection broadcast, we usually broadcast every Monday and Wednesday at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We take on topics around business, entrepreneurship, leadership, personal branding, public speaking, all the things I care about. But I also bring guests who share stuff that I don't know much about, and they complement for my knowledge and help me learn as well as for my followers. And we like to engage people. So if you are joining this call, this is the perfect time. I mean, UBI, you have questions, right? Questions. We want you to engage. So why don't you first start off by telling us where you're from? Are you from North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, um, Australia, or start asking questions about UBI and see, and maybe Floyd can answer them for you because he's here to test his mettle because I think he's going to handle any question you give him.
Let's do it.
So, yeah, exactly. He's ready. Uh, so, so, and if you like what you're seeing, tag people to join the conversation. You can share us on your own page. Let's spread the word around and retweet this. You can let people know that this is the conversation we'll be a part of. So, and I do thank you for joining us today. So let's start off actually, Floyd, but let's learn a bit more about you. Tell us a bit more about your personal and professional story that you'd like to share with us today.
Yeah. So firstly, I'm not your typical activist for UBI. I'm a CEO of a mid-sized company. I've been running entrepreneur circles and events in Toronto. That's where I met Bobby. So very happy to engage with Bobby in that way. I have a computer science degree from University of Waterloo, and my business is training software engineers on the latest trends in software development. Andrew Yang calls me the Yang of the North, but I'm not a politician. I'm just someone who's a systems thinker and really concerned about where the economy is going. I first heard about basic income from an Elon Musk tweet, I think somewhere many years ago, talking about artificial intelligence and how this is inevitable and is needed. And the more I dug into the numbers, the more I became quite concerned because what I see is that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. You may have heard Andrew Yang talk about that during the debate circuit in the Democratic Party last year. What does it actually mean? Well, I'll get into that in a bit. Let me finish the introduction, I suppose. So I got so motivated when I heard about basic income because I was really excited about what would a society be like where everyone can pursue their potential. No one is held back by material constraints or unsafe environments, where everybody has options to take risks, options to pursue whatever they want. That's why Silicon Valley investors call basic income seed funding for the people. I'm guessing Bobby's audience here is a lot of entrepreneurs. Well, imagine if you could unlock the risk-taking capacity of an entire society, because the economy consists of people. And right now, in this fourth industrial revolution, half of us have experienced wage stagnation for 40 years since the advent of computing and robotics, and the bottom third of us have actually experienced wage losses and increasing cost of living that has caused a lot of suffering and a lot of debt. And we've seen these issues in the economy really blown up now with the pandemic, where we're seeing a disproportionate amount of the suffering caused by the job losses and even the infections falling on people of color, falling on the bottom third of income earners. And the basic income would turn all that around because people would have the ability to make better decisions for themselves, to pursue better long-term outcomes, take risks that require a multi-year investment, just like any entrepreneur who gets seed investing. So I'm really excited about that kind of future, and that's why I became really passionate about basic income. And also on a more personal note, I grew up in a house with domestic violence, and if my mother had a basic income, she would have had more options. She would also have more respect, because I think power dynamics, when people become vulnerable and exploitable, that's when power dynamics can rear their most ugly head. But when you know that someone has the option to leave and the option to take care of themselves, they generally will get more respect, and they're safer in their own skin. And that's the kind of world that I want to live in.
That's great, and very very eloquently spoken and articulated. You've done a good job of sharing your brand story in a really great way. So I think as a brand expert, I love the way you presented that. It's really great. You probably done it many times before, though. But let's switch more to I'm curious about how things are going for you and your businesses during this pandemic. The last 6 months. How's it been for you?
Oh, it's been hard. It's been really tough. I mean, so my business, so we have a news website called infoq.com where over 1 million software developers a month are learning about trends in software engineering. It's in Chinese, Brazilian, Portuguese, and English. And so that business is actually doing okay because we're seeing a lot of businesses that don't have event revenue anymore are looking for online advertising opportunities. It's basically a newspaper online,
Yeah.
but majority of our revenue is coming from events. So we run a well-known event in the software engineering space called QCon that serves many thousands of senior software engineers a year with events in New York, San Francisco, London, Beijing, Shanghai, and Sao Paulo. And that event, obviously we haven't. It's been much more problematic. We had to cancel our QCon New York that happened last June, and we're looking at having online alternatives for people who want to go online,
Yeah.
but it's tough. So it's tough. Unfortunately, we had to do some layoffs early this year, and that was really, really painful. Probably one of the most painful experiences of my life. So yeah, it's tough. So it's a crazy time for us now. But also looking around though, it's also a time of great innovation.
Yeah.
Businesses are innovating, they're automating. They're right now. I've never experienced like my business is 15 years old, but it seems like we're a startup again. Every week, like doing new product development, inventing what's the new thing we're going to do to try and turn things around, and that's really exciting. I didn't think I would ever experience that again in this company.
Yeah, I feel you on that too. I mean, I also run a training and events company, and I'm also a professional speaker, and so everything kind of tanked or fell apart, and so we've had to pivot both the two companies that I run. So now I'm doing more coaching, and then the other one, obviously, the virtual stuff, and yeah, so I think it is an opportunity for innovation, and I think being an entrepreneur helps us to be more resilient during these types of times because we're kind of used to uncertainty, although it's a lot. I can tell you that. But no, I do appreciate that. Uh, so everyone, I'm here with Floyd Marinescu, and he's the founder of UBI Works. He's going to talk about universal basic income and why it's so important for UBI for a better, faster economic recovery. So I definitely want you guys to join in and ask questions. So if you are joining this broadcast, let us know where you're from. Let us know what your questions are about UBI, how it's going to work and benefit you, because I think that's going to be a really powerful discussion. And I'll kind of share my initial thoughts about UBI when I first heard about. When I first heard about UBI, actually, my initial take was it was Star Trek. And the reason I say Star Trek is because I used to watch Star Trek Next Generation as a kid, and there was an episode with Mark Twain, and he's like, "What? There's no, well, what do people do for money?" And he's like, "No, no." He's like, so he says, "We've eliminated poverty, we've eliminated despair, we've eliminated hopelessness because people now their main goal in life is just find a purpose. They're not worried about the money piece. They just find a purpose for themselves, and that's it, to better themselves." And I was like, "Oh, that's amazing." And I'm like, if UBI can do that and people have that support, maybe they have the freedom to be like that. And so that's kind of how I looked at it. But I think it's probably good for people to start with the basics because I think some people may not even understand it and why it's so important. So why don't you just maybe start chatting a bit about UBI, what it is, and why it's so important. Then maybe we can do some more drill down into some of the technical stuff.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, when people talk about basic income, they generally mean two different programs, and particularly in Canada, this difference is quite evident. But when Martin Luther King was guaranteed income, and in 1968, it almost passed in the U.S. House. It failed by just a couple of votes in the Senate because Democrats thought it wasn't generous enough. They were campaigning for something called a guaranteed minimum income, where basically the less you have, the more you get. It's progressive, and people also call it a negative income tax, which Milton Friedman was for, the right-wing free market economist. Even Friedrich Hayek, the libertarian icon economist, was for it. So a guaranteed minimum income, effectively, you get a benefit of, let's say, $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month, and if you have no income, you have all that money, and as you earn an income, some of that is clawed back as you get more, until eventually, as your employment income is high enough, you would experience, it would eventually phase out, and you wouldn't keep any more of it. That is a really good anti-poverty measure, and in that way, you're directly addressing poverty, raising people above it, and also creating a raise for working people. Because right now, 2/3 of people who work are in poverty, which is crazy. How is that? How could that be? How could you be working full-time or even more than full-time and still be in poverty? So guaranteed minimum income addresses working poverty by creating this benefit phase out, and it's a lot cheaper, at least in terms of the gross cost, when you imagine a progressive model like that. Now, that's not what Andrew Yang was talking about. It's also not the model that I personally prefer, although I think that has to be part of the mix. So Andrew Yang talks about a true universal basic income where everybody, literally everyone, whether you're wealthy or you're poor, gets, I like to think about it as a share of the economy. We all get a dividend every month. It's the same amount. And the issue with that model is that for the gross cost, for it to be high enough to actually make a dent on poverty, the cost is astronomical. Like in Canada, it would be like $700 billion to give people $2,000 a month. And versus a pure guaranteed minimum income you could do for as low as $30 to $80 billion a year. Did I say a month? I meant a year.
Yeah.
And so what we did with UBI Works, we came out with a proposal. We call it Recovery UBI, for fair and faster recovery. No matter where you are in the world, you should check this out, because this idea could map to your country. So in our model, we propose that everyone have a $2,000 guaranteed minimum income, as well as inclusive of a $500 universal dividend that goes to all adults. And why? Because in a typical guaranteed minimum income, the phase out is gone around $30,000, $40,000 a year. But I think people in the middle class, they need a raise too. And people on median wages haven't seen a raise in 40 years if you account for cost of living increases. And that's primarily due to automation and globalization. So I see the dividend, UBI dividend, as a way to share in the economy, a way to organize ourselves as a society so that advances in automation that are affecting jobs and affecting our depressing wage growth helps us all directly with a check. So I think we need, having both together is a far lower cost way to both end poverty and give everyone a share of the economy, which we can build off. Because in the future, with artificial intelligence coming, we're in big trouble. I mean, the impacts of automation, I mentioned earlier, the fourth industrial revolution. What does that mean in a fourth industrial revolution? It means that simultaneously we have new, very highly paid technical jobs being created for the top, say, 20% or 30% of people in society. We're seeing a shrinking of the middle class versus before modern computing robotics. Everyone was moving up into the middle. Literally, we had the kind of hope that people have, frankly, in China right now, where the middle class is growing and people are leaving rural poverty situations. We haven't had that in developed countries in decades. We're seeing a shrinking middle, a growing high end, and a much bigger growing low end of the job market, of jobs that are lower income, are precarious, are part-time, people are working harder and longer, are in greater debt than ever before. And that's not how an economy should work. An economy should be raising people up the middle. An economy should be increasing your free time and increasing your pay, not decreasing it, not creating environments where all you can find around you is low-income work, where you don't have the opportunity to or even the free time to try and retrain or better yourself. But that's what we've been experiencing. We've been experiencing that for decades. And Andrew Yang likes to talk about how 4 million manufacturing jobs were automated away in the US in the 2000s. People think it was China. Actually, automation was responsible for, I believe it was 6 times more job losses than globalization at the time. And my family experienced that directly, because my father and my uncle were involved in Ontario's automotive manufacturing sector. And during the early 2000s, they lost their careers. They saw, my father was a tool and die designer. He used to go all these tool shops and do designs for their metal stamping parts. And he said like half of the small and medium-sized businesses had to go, and they couldn't survive. And the ones that survived automated heavily in order to stay competitive and reduce their prices. That's how automation works. So right now we're here in the COVID pandemic, nearly a Great Depression. And what's happening? Businesses are trying to do more with less. Of course they do. You're doing it too. We're all trying to do more with less right now.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and the automation that exists today can already automate 40% of all the tasks that we do at work. So I'm quite concerned about what's going to come. We already see 40 years of wage stagnation and wage depression and shrinking of the middle. So what's going to happen when that accelerates? It's already accelerating. So basic income is frankly how we can navigate that forward. And I can explain how, but maybe I'll stop for a second in case you had another question.
Yeah, I mean, man, there's so much to unpack here. Like that. So you mentioned a lot of stuff. So you have a great plan, which I think is really interesting. I'd love for you to talk a bit more about working poverty, because I think it's a big issue. And I just explain to people. And again, if anyone has questions on UBI or basically how it works, please ask questions. But can you explain to me kind of working poverty and what that really means and what's going on?
Well, that's working poverty. Two-thirds of people in poverty are working. People are harder and longer than ever before. So, like, what a joke. A 40-hour work week? That's yeah, maybe people making 6 figures are working longer in their office jobs. But people making 30,000, 20,000 with multiple jobs to try and get, and you can raise minimum wage up to the infinite. Something else. We need both, frankly. So what is working poverty? It looks like people having to live further away from places of work because housing prices are getting so expensive. People literally having to work 60 hours a week through multiple jobs. Just not being able to afford basic necessities. It looks like increasing debts, where I've seen statistics in the United States and Canada that half of all working people or half of all adults don't have more than like 2-3 weeks of savings in case of an emergency. That's crazy. That's not how an economy should work. It's not how it used to work, frankly, in the 50s and 60s, before the advent of modern computing. It's just not how it's supposed to work. So this is, frankly, a shame. It's a failure of our market system, the fact that we're seeing working poverty now. And UBI is how we turn that around, because, frankly, there are structural systemic issues that are reducing demand for wage labor. You can look at any, in majority of the OECD countries, the majority of developed countries, we're seeing a shrinking share of our nation's income. All the income generated every year in a country, in almost always, the amount going to working people has been declining for many decades. It used to be going up, again, before the advent of computing robotics. And after 1973 or so, it started going down, which means jobs don't realize prosperity. This sounds crazy to even say, but jobs aren't working for a lot of people because incomes are not keeping up with cost of living. Right. And there's only 8% of jobs on offer are STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, math. There's not enough high-paying jobs for everyone either.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, this is earning at the bottom 60%. Solving one policy, you can't solve that through like investing in infrastructure and all the typical, or raising minimum wage, all the typical stuff people talk about. We need to share in the gains from our technological automation. We need to give everyone a share of basic income. I see basic income as an economic reform, even more than a social reform. Yes, it's a way to replace the welfare state. It's a way to give people more dignity and a way to give people more time, buying us time out of poverty to pursue better potential in our lives. But it's also a way to share in the gains. Right. Let me know if the speed's okay. I can switch my connection too. I see it says very poor in the corner.
Yeah. That's sometimes a little bit spotty, but that's fine.
Should I switch? I can tether.
As long as you don't fall off the broadcast, by all means do that. While you're doing that, okay. I'll say again, we're talking to Floyd Marinescu. He's the founder of UBI Works, advocating as an activist for universal basic income, and he's an entrepreneur and a business owner, so he comes with a lot of great experience to advocate for that. And I have lots of questions. Actually, I'm already taking notes. I have lots of questions because I want to be an advocate of it too. I support you, and I support you on Twitter and LinkedIn and whatnot. But I also want to be able to be better informed to talk about this stuff. One question I had actually was, there's so many people who complain about it or fight against it, or sometimes because they don't get it, but other times they have certain issues. One of the things I'm curious about is the idea of capitalism. Is capitalism both a cause of this, issue in terms of why we need it, but is also capitalism the way that we can actually use it for, for making things better? I'm just curious, because it seems to me that a lot of people say, well, capitalism is the reason why we need UBI. What do you think?
Actually, I don't agree with that. Okay. I don't agree with that at all.
Please explain. I can tell you what other people tell me.
Yeah. So in some ways, UBI is capitalism for all. Because imagine that you're getting capital income, literally income you didn't work for, but is based on an economy you have an interest in. That's the same thing capitalists get. I get tons of money on dividends from my stock portfolio and from my active business. So this actually gives a share of the economy to everyone. So we all share in the gains.
Won't critics say that's a handout?
I see it as
I'm just telling you what they say. I mean, I don't believe that. I mean, I think we should support our population, but what's your thoughts on that?
I see it as a sharing in our commonwealth, sharing in the gains from the economy that are increasingly going to very few. You can't argue it's a handout when 12 people collectively have $1 trillion of net worth. You know how they got that net worth? Through network effects. Network effects means you interacting on Facebook, you interacting on Uber, giving these companies a tipping point that gives them a critical mass where they can literally swallow up all other industries. Amazon is destroying Main Street retail, taking away jobs, and also with modern automation and software development, artificial intelligence that's coming, even in the last 40 years, the actual viability of the job as a construct for how we share in the gains has been at risk. So how is it a handout if jobs can no longer be a way that people can reliably move up the social ladder when the middle class is shrinking? So these are systemic issues. So I see that technology is actually our commonwealth. Technology was created by public financing for the most part, and by public investments in education that created all these smart minds that have innovated and created more technology. All these entrepreneurs, all of us now who are wealthy today, this post-millennial or millennial class, we got there through the internet. The internet was created through public financing. So I don't see it as a handout. I see it as a dividend, a share of the economy that frankly we all deserve. And we all deserve it because jobs are no longer delivering more free time and greater wage earnings for the bottom half. It hasn't for 40 years. So we got to wake up and realize that we need a systemic change. Earned income is no longer sufficient to keep aggregate demand, these are economics terms, high enough for greater economic growth. So we need to share in capital income the same way capitalists do. And that's why I see UBI in a sense is like capitalism for all. And it's
Go ahead, please go ahead.
It's also worth noting people who like to use the word handout. Well, I challenge you. Why don't you pay back the government several $100,000 that you got in free high school and free education since kindergarten and free access to roads, free drinking water in public parks? Our society is built on paying it forward. A decent society makes it a little bit easier for the next generation to have more free time and to have greater earnings potential. We haven't been doing that for 40 years. And I'll also add to that people who see it as a handout or have more right-leaning perspectives, excellent. You should know that Milton Friedman, the most pro-free market economist in the world, was for a basic income. You should know that Friedrich Hayek, the libertarian icon, the founder of Austrian economics, was for it as a way to control the kind of power imbalances that can occur in a pure market system. So at the end of the day, a market system is excellent at generating innovation, at generating wealth, and solving real human problems. But market logic does not include human logic and does not include environmental logic. That logic needs to be worked into the system. And a dividend off some of the gains in our economy is one of the smartest ways we can address the human impact of capitalism.
And I think where my confusion lay around the capitalism piece is that when you talk about working poverty, you talk about the top 1% and all the people that are not doing so well. It feels to me that capitalism has been a cause of squeezing that and creating that situation. I mean, obviously there's lots of other causes too, but that's kind of where my confusion kind of lay.
Capitalism isn't the cause. Like the government or us not working, making for all of us is the cause. Capitalism is the greatest way to achieve rapid innovation, to unlock human potential. We need more capitalism, and UBI is capitalism for all.
No. I'm glad you're helping me get a better understanding of that. And a lot of people are now asking questions, which is great. So Greg says, thanks for doing this. And Halima, Ed, and Amar have. So Amar says, the problem is that it used to be when companies grew and prospered, they shared the wealth with employees. This was because the company execs used to care about their works and understood they are not where they are without them. Employees have become disposable, and the mindset has shifted to as rewarding shareholders and achieving astronomical bonuses for the execs versus helping the workers. That's what Amar says. Halina asks, what would be the trade-off for the population to receive UBI?
What would be the trade-off? It's interesting.
What will be the trade-off for the population to receive UBI?
Well, this may not be what you'd expect, but I think people are afraid of their own potential.
Oh, well, that's pretty
Uh,
deep. You know, I was thinking the financial thing,
I
but
think,
okay.
yeah, we'll go into the financial thing. But imagine if literally you had no excuse. You had no excuse about not
Right.
pursuing your potential. Imagine the freedom you could have if you knew that you could perhaps get off a dead-end job or dead-end career and take 6 months or even a year to not work, to work towards what you want to do next. It's kind of scary. I actually made a transition like that myself not too long ago. I went on a
Right.
sabbatical. It was freaky. It's freaky when you have the opportunity to address yourself, to work on yourself. That's kind of a trade-off on a personal level, because sometimes we find safety in just doing the same old, same old. We find safety in repetitive work. So in the fourth industrial revolution, we urgently need to help people navigate and have the means to pursue better careers and better futures. And there's no better, more efficient way to do that than providing an income floor people can temporarily rely on as they work on their next thing or work on part-time or start a business. People like to say, like, let's just invest in education and stuff like that. Well, yeah, but if you don't have time, you can't go to school. So income security first and education second. Other trade-offs, yeah, of course, will taxes go up? Sure, they'll have to go up. But with tax reform, it's also an opportunity to tackle some of the other problems that we have in society. Some of the other, for example, taxes on use of our environment, taxes on pollution. There's a lot of ways you can actually pay for basic income without touching your personal income taxes. And one of the contributions that my nonprofit, UBI Works, made to this cause is showing 8 different ways to pay for what we call recovery UBI, a $500 a month dividend for all adults and a $2,000 income guarantee. You can go to ubiworks.ca/how to pay, and you can see 8 different ways. And those 8 ways could work in any country.
Awesome.
You could just port that research to your country, but the general buckets that we chose all work, and more than half of them don't involve changes to personal income taxes. So yeah, would taxes have to be a bit higher? Probably, but they don't have to be income tax. Could be consumption taxes, could be indirect taxes that might affect prices of things. But guess what? You're also getting a share of the economy paid to you every month in cash that would offset those things. And we're creating this opportunity to that as technology moves humanity forward, to make sure no one is left behind, and that people who are being displaced by all this rapid change have a chance to invest in a better future for themselves, and also get this economic recovery moving faster. Because at a very simple level, UBI is an economic stimulus. People with the least money spend a greater proportion of their income as a percentage of their overall income earnings. So we know that a basic income would actually generate at least $2 of GDP growth for every dollar invested, and actually returns 55 cents back in government revenues from that flow. We know this because in Canada, there's already a form of a basic income for people with children. It's called the Canada Child Benefit. And over 1 million families are currently getting more than $600 a month straight up. And over 400,000 families are getting more than $1,000 a month right now. And it hasn't decreased people working. Like, people are working more. We've seen 10 years of recovery with unemployment reaching record lows with this program in place. So this has actually contributed over nearly half a million jobs. So imagine if a basic income was in place. That would actually be a huge bottom-up stimulus for the economy.
I love how you said that. I mean, having a purpose and having no excuses, and you have this support. I mean, yeah, I think there is probably some sort of fear around that, but I think a long term, most people would start to do something, and also there'd be a lot of support for other people to help them get there. And I think that could be a really powerful mindset shift and societal shift in terms of how we, going back to the Star Trek model that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of people who are criticize like healthcare investment. They say, well, it's really, really expensive, but that obviously if you invest in better healthcare investment, then the cost of healthcare long term will go down. So it actually is beneficial, even though it is costly up front. Is there a similar kind of thing with UBI where there's a larger investment up front, but then longer term, what are the benefits that we get that maybe overall make sense?
Oh, absolutely. So we're actually working with economics analysis firm that within a month or so, we're going to actually publish research that shows what a basic income would do in terms of our economic impact. There absolutely is a payback period. So let's say you buy a commercial property, you want to rent it out, right? Like, let's do the whole rich dad, poor dad thing. You put a down payment, you buy the house on leverage, and eventually it pays itself off and starts paying you back. That's
Right.
exactly the same thing with a national basic income program. You're literally investing in people. You're creating an immediate economic stimulus, which, as I mentioned earlier, we know from the Canada Child Benefit that every dollar invested drove $2 of GDP growth and 55 cents of revenue came back to the government because of increased spending. That's incredible. So you almost immediately get back 55 cents on the dollar. And then imagine the impact long term of all these people pursuing their potential, finding better jobs, perhaps resisting crappy jobs and getting better wages, which would create some upwards wage growth, which we haven't seen from the private sector in a long time. It happened naturally without regulation. Imagine long term the impact of all the innovation. Innovation ultimately creates wealth. There's no other way to create economic growth than innovation. We need to unlock the entrepreneurs in our society, free them from dead-end jobs, and have them the ability to go and pursue better ideas. And we've seen this. We've seen basic income trials around the world where we saw huge increases in entrepreneurship in India and Namibia in those trials. We saw increases in entrepreneurship in Ontario. We saw decreases in crime. Imagine people can get off whatever rut they are in life that will lead them to crime and actually go get a job or start a business with their entrepreneurial skills they might be misdirecting. Long term, we'll see cost savings in society. We've seen, for example, in the trial that happened in Canada in the 1970s, an 8% decrease in hospitalization visits. Imagine what's a better use of that time that people can use for themselves, right. Or savings in criminal justice systems, savings in healthcare, savings in all over the place. So all that savings, all that more efficient use of people's, more dignified use of people's time will lead to a payback point. And we're going to find out exactly what that payback point is through this research that we're commissioning that you could follow on ubiworks.ca probably in late September or early October.
Cool. That's awesome. Great points too about innovation, fueling wealth creation and value creation. And the analogy of the house, yeah, I think that is the simplest. That's a great analogy. So I love that. I mean, people don't think about themselves, but think of yourself as a house, and eventually, yeah, it's great payoff. Lots more questions, so this is great. Ed says, doesn't UBI increase the cost of goods sold, thus making the overall cost of living increase, thus defeating the purpose?
There's a lot of debate about inflation, and inflation is a factor of supply and demand. It's not a factor only of money supply. We've seen the U.S. print trillions of dollars in the last 10 years, and it hasn't touched inflation at all. Even in Canada, there's been, the Bank of Canada has been doing all kinds of interventions in the last 10 years, and we haven't really seen high inflation. We've seen what I mentioned, the Canada Child Benefit, which is a basic income that most Canadian families receive. It hasn't caused inflation. So when I say the answer to inflation is, well, it's not like China and Amazon can't scale to meet your needs. It's very unlikely we would see inflation for the majority of products. It's possible we might see some inflation at the very low end of the housing market, because a lot of people right now who are in poverty level housing want to escape poverty level housing. They want to go to better housing, and this way they could afford it. But at the end of the day, most people are still living somewhere. We're not drastically reducing the stock of housing. We're just creating more demand for better housing. And probably what we'd end up seeing is a lot of low-income housing. Perhaps the rent will go up slightly until market forces can come into play, and then competition comes into play, and those landlords would also be able to clean up and fix up their properties because they also have a bit more money. So there's no evidence that basic income would cause increase in prices. Now, based on how you pay for it, whatever tax regime that you choose, that could impact pricing. So, for example, Andrew Yang talked about how we should create a VAT tax in Canada, whereas most developed countries have a value-added tax. This taxes every stage of production and ends off with an increase of tax when you purchase a good. So he wanted a 10% VAT tax, which is half of the European average. And actually, one of the payment plans for recovery UBI in Canada, one of the 8 ways to pay that we came up with, we also suggested a 10% increase in Canada's value-added tax, which is called the GST, which in Canada would mean an average harmonized sales tax across all provinces of around 22%, which is equivalent to all of Europe. Almost all of Europe has that kind of value-added tax, and as well as a few corporate tax increases. That would increase prices, but who would be paying for it? Large corporations, wealthy people. Who actually spends so much of their money that you wouldn't actually get a net increase in your overall income if you're getting $500 a month or $1,000 a month from a basic income? So literally, a VAT tax is a way to harness economic growth to pay you a dividend. That's exactly what it is. So yeah, there could be some impact on pricing depending on how it's taxed. there's also ways to tax it that would not affect pricing. That way, you're affecting more the share, the profits being generated by shareholders, or profits being generated by the 1%, which would not have much impact on pricing, because right now the 1% are hoarding massive amounts of money and not spending it, and that's keeping economic growth slow. So we found a tax system that actually circulates this lifeblood of money that the economy has from a bottom-up way, a trickle-up economics manner. We might actually see prices go down because we're creating better economies of scale that can be leveraged by friggin' Amazon and China and all the high-end manufacturing that we have right now. So there's really no evidence that prices would go up, but it really depends on how it's taxed.
Fantastic insights. I mean, again, I think my audience is very impressed by all the knowledge that you're dropping for people, which is great about this, which is, again, a better way to advocate for UBI, which is fantastic. So thank you for that. Another question's coming in, and there are questions in the feed here. What benchmarks this is also from Ed, what benchmarks do you suggest that need to be met or maintained in order for a person to continue receiving the benefit? I'm supportive of the concept, provided there are expectations that need to be met in order to receive the benefit.
What conditions should we place on your existence?
Yeah. Right.
What conditions should we place on your value as a human being? Basic income establishes a minimum value of a person in some ways. It's your share of the economy. We're in a situation where the value being created by society is going to a decreasing number of infinitesimal amounts of people compared to the overall population. What conditions do we place on their wealth creation? None. So if we can establish the value of a human being that to not fall below a poverty line, that should be unconditional, absolutely unconditional. And that, I would say, is a great public advance. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. We need a means to help half of this country, half the people in every country move forward, pursue better jobs, pursue higher incomes. And basic income gives us a share of the economy that is not a social program, it's not a handout, it's an economic reform that circulates capital in a way that benefits everybody. It's how we organize ourselves as a society so that automation and robotics can help us all. So I don't think that should be conditional whatsoever. That is actually a major advance in society, an advance as important as the invention of high school. High school was invented in one of the earlier industrial revolutions, when people were moving to the cities, taking on manufacturing jobs, working at factories. You had a huge class of people who simply because they had a strong back were no longer really valued by the market. So what did they do? They invented a tax system to pay for high schools so that people could stay in school and get educated and become literate enough to be able to work well in these city jobs. So we are now in a fourth industrial revolution, but this revolution is different because the technologies we're creating today are literally depressing wages and displacing jobs at all income levels. So I think the high school invention of this generation is sharing in capital gains, sharing in capital value creation with everybody, and that should be unconditional.
Now, I appreciate that, and Douglas says, "Sorry, can't subscribe to this," which is a good segue into the challenges. Why are people so? I mean, seatbelts save lives, so hey, here we go, seatbelt laws. And in the beginning it was hard, but now everyone's like, yeah, wear your damn seatbelt. It seems to me the way you describe it that this is something I totally agree. This is really a great way to do it. So what are challenges for getting people on board with UBI, and what are they normally concerned about or complaining about, and what are some of your how do you address that?
Well, the pandemic has actually brought a lot more people on board, because people who previously thought that they had job security, that working hard will get you ahead, they could see how actual frail this notion that a job is the main way to have security actually is, where millions of people are suddenly out of work, and millions of people are not going to have jobs to go back to because companies are increasingly and rapidly automating during this time. So right. Are those people bad people? You mean are millions of Americans and Canadians all over the world, is something wrong with them because they can't find work or they can't find middle class work? Of course not. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. We are literally creating a polarized labor market where the middle class is shrinking. There's very few hopes for people to get into the middle class. We're creating an underclass of low income, low wage, low secure jobs. gig jobs where you're running from place to place. And the gig economy, frankly, is also a factor of technology. There'd be no gig economy if there wasn't modern computing, if there weren't cell phones to coordinate you through Uber driving and all these things. Technology is actually sliced and diced the security and the income earnings potential of a job. So technology has affected the power of unions to negotiate better wages, because there's already been economics research that shows that people lose bargaining power when companies can automate. This is happening right now. So people, I think, who are most opposed to UBI still believe that working hard can get you ahead. And of course, working hard can get you ahead. But from a systemic perspective, we're seeing an economy that is no longer moving people up in the middle, is in fact moving people down into a permanent underclass of low-income work. And that's not okay. And the purpose of an economy is to uplift humanity. It's a way to organize ourselves to achieve better outcomes for everybody. And it's not working. So the solution is to share in capital income. And that's what UBI does. So we all have a part of the economy, and we can all prosper as technology continues automating even more jobs. So yeah, that's one of my main responses to people who I think generally come at it from a work ethic perspective, and it will unlock our entrepreneurial capacity, our risk taking. It'll allow people to experience the benefits of modern technology that is changing our economy in a way that no longer favors work for a lot of people.
And that's actually the last two comments we had, which is, Ed says, should an able-bodied person be held accountable to want to better themselves? And then Douglas, I'd asked him to actually tell me why he was concerned. He said, I never expect a handout. A hand up, yes, but handouts stifle self-esteem and motivation. Tie it to re-education. Make sure a stipend is an investment, not charity. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, we all receive tons of unconditional support. We have free high school, free kindergarten, we have free roads, we have free police, we have free law, free lawyers if we can't afford it. A decent society pays it forward to make it a little bit easier for the next generation to achieve their potential. And maybe let's get to the crux of the work ethic issue. I think not working is a mental health issue. So in a future economy where there's a basic income, where people, if someone just doesn't know what to do with their lives, then the social workers of the future will be more like life coaches, helping them find what they should be doing with their lives. Be more like Bobby, who's helping people, inspiring them to achieve new potentials in their life.
Right.
So I don't think we should make it conditional, because I think we can find a new future where we trust the basic human condition, where we trust that people want to better themselves. I personally think that it's the most fundamental human need, is to feel useful. But usefulness doesn't necessarily map to a paid job for a profitable company. There's a lot of people who are being very useful right now who are uncompensated, like mothers, like volunteers, caregivers of all kinds. People do community service work. I've noticed that a lot of people doing volunteer work are retired. Why? Because they're already getting a basic income, so they can afford to spend their time doing things that are meaningful to them. We would see a lot more volunteering. We would see a lot more kinds of work unlocked by our economy that doesn't map neatly to a pure profit sector role. We would see an unlocking of part of humanity that frankly is our birthright, that I would really like to see, where people pursue work of meaning and passion and partially subsidize that through a basic income until they can actually become more profitable. This is just the entrepreneur's journey. If you start off as a graphics artist, you got to compete online for like less than $5 an hour with people all over the world on Upwork until you can build your resume out and eventually charge more locally. Well, guess what? How are you going to do that on $5 an hour? You can't. So you need a basic income to subsidize the early stages of your career. Millennials right now are the most screwed by the way this economy has shifted. Now, right now, I've seen a graph in the New York Times that our parents and our grandparents' generation, they've had 30% of the net wealth in the U.S. by the time they'd reached 30, and then our parents' generation had 20% of the net wealth in the U.S. by the time they'd reached 30. And today, millennials have 2% of the net wealth by the age of 30. So I would say to you that we have to recognize that we are in the fourth industrial revolution, and the same old notions that handouts and blah 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 and like all that stuff, it's just not going to work. That the typical old policies are not going to work to create an economy that lifts everyone up. We need to share in capital income, and we need to share in the gains of our technology. We need to give everyone a share of the economy, and that is not a social reform. That is an economic reform.
Yeah, and I actually relate a lot of this to parenting. I mean, when I look at my children, I mean, the more I offer them support and guidance and resources and tools, and not have them worry so much about money. Although I still give them, some money, and I teach them about financial responsibility and managing their finances. They will thrive. And if I don't offer those things, I don't offer that support, they're less likely to thrive. And I think it's the same thing for society. Now, a lot of people are commenting here. Ed says, none of what you're saying is free. I pay an exorbitant amount of taxes already to pay for what you say is free. And then Halima says, entrepreneurs step up and generate more leaders, build bridges to learning, encourage and work together. There's much work to do, but it is possible. And then she also adds, I have to add this, Black population mainly have greater income and unemployment gap versus the rest of the population as a majority, according to Statistics Canada. She also agrees on mental health and generating innovation to solve problems and build bridges in communities. And finally, Douglas says, I'm retired because I paid into my pension. I invested. Nobody gives me charity. And I mean, my general take is, every person's situation is unique, but you have to be mindful of that. There are a lot of people who do not have the same life you have. They don't have the same benefits you have. They don't have the same privilege that we have. And so we have to be mindful of those people, because what we're trying to do is help all people. We're not trying to just, I think that if my extra taxes, I'm middle class, if my extra taxes go to help a lot of people and help education, help roads, and help everything else, yeah, I'm all for it. And if you're not, then you have to ask yourself the question, why not? Why is it just about you? Any thoughts on some of the comments I shared, Floyd?
So I'm going to encourage you, because very legitimate concerns about increased taxes. Please check out our 8 ways to pay for recovery UBI. Not 1, not 2, 8 ways. ubiworks.ca/how-to-pay. And also, please sign our petition. We got 10,000 signatures in a week and a half since we launched. We want to get to 100,000. We want to be noticed by the government and all political parties. Build a voting bloc that will be unavoidable, that will change the direction of the next election. You can find our whole plan in our petition at ubiworks.ca/recovery, and check out 8 ways to pay. Many of those ways would actually be a tax reform that could lower your taxes. And actually, because in fact, if you're already middle class and you're already making decent wage, basic income is actually a tax refund. It's actually money you're getting back that offsets your taxes. So based on the form of tax that is created to pay for this, which is not as high as you might think, you would be probably getting a tax refund, unless you're like in the top 3, 4, 5%, 10%. Likely is you might even be getting more than you're putting out in terms of taxes. And a lot of it, again, wouldn't be through income tax. And I guess on another note, we have to see what is happening with the economy. Life is getting worse and worse for the bottom third of people who are working, because a job is no longer a way on its own to work your way up into the middle. It's not. The wage growth has been stagnant or actually falling as a share of expenses in the last 40 years, especially for the bottom third. How is that going to end? How is it going to end if people get poorer and poorer and more precarious and more in debt when there's literally no way up? So basic income is recognizing the fact that technology has already created so much productivity that we have reached a place of decreased demand for wage labor that has caused this lack of wage growth. So to the gentleman who said, I retired, I paid my way in, great. And you worked during an economy where the middle class was expanding. We're now in an economy where the middle class is shrinking. It's getting worse for your children and their grandchildren. We have to do something to adjust the flows of capital in our economy to benefit everyone. And basic income is what we need to do.
And you mentioned the petition, which is great, and you also mentioned ubiworks.ca. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I definitely make sure you'll check that out. Again, I want to be mindful of your time because the conversation is going really well, and there's tons of questions and comments. So I want to be mindful of that. You mentioned the petition. I'd like to talk about goals, right? So sure, a pandemic has promoted the conversation around UBI much more than it was before in terms of what Andrew Yang was doing back about a year ago. What's the goal, and where are you hoping? Where's your optimism lie in terms of where we can get to and start incorporating this? Is this like I still don't know where it's going to be. What is your goal for the end game, the end result here?
Well, the goal for UBI Works as an organization is to make basic income the defining election issue in the next election. Because at the end of the day, any kind of major program like that, someone needs to run on it and be voted in. it's very unlikely that the current government of Canada, at the throne speech happening next week, will just say, you know what, we're going to make basic income part of the recovery, and now either other parties, let's play chicken. You either support us or like don't support us, and we're going to the next election. And Canadians will say what they want. I mean, if they do that, that'd be freaking awesome. But I'm not that. I don't have tremendous faith in government to do bold challenges, especially in an environment like this. So the end game for us is to create such a large and visible block of Canadians that support basic income that the parties have to take note and they have to run on it in order to get elected in a future election. Yeah, the end game for Canada overall and for any Western country, I think, is to recognize that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. We are leaving behind the bottom half of the country, and we need to put this in place so that people can buy people time to avoiding poverty, to pursue better work for themselves, better futures. That's how we navigate the fourth industrial revolution. That's how we create the conditions for people to invest in retraining and re-education, by having time. You can't do that without time. And also, it's how we solve the extreme inequality by actually sharing in the economy with everyone. Give everyone a share of the economy, a monthly check, so we all benefit as automation continues and as economic growth continues. That's what we need to do to navigate the fourth industrial revolution.
And there's a great comment by Amar Taylor, and I think Douglas is going off on another. I'm sure we've convinced him, but Amar says to assume that people today have the same opportunities for growth is extremely short-sighted. I paid 10 times more for my house, middle class, than my parents did 40 years ago. Incomes have not grown anywhere near that multiple. So this has been a great discussion. Floyd, I really appreciate your time coming in, and we should do this again because I think there's just so much more to talk about. What's your kind of, how can people get in touch with you and reach out to you if they have questions?
So ubiworks.ca, join our email list, join our Facebook group off the UBI Works Facebook page, off our Twitter, you're welcome to email the UBI Works email alias with questions. Follow us, be part of our adventure. Please sign our petition, ubiworks.ca/recovery. And check out our 8 ways to pay for it, because some of those ways to pay would actually address the increasing cost of housing. Yeah, because it's unfair, frankly, that our cost of housing should be so much higher. And a lot of that has nothing to do, it has more to do with actions of the central bank than anything else. And some of the tax reforms that we propose would actually address that.
And Halim was like, yes, Bobby, this deserves a weekly or monthly series. Okay, well, that's a lot, but I can Floyd back. If you guys have further questions for Floyd, comment below, tag him, tag me. Let's keep the conversation flowing. And then, and the other thing you do, honestly, to get the conversation going is take this broadcast, share it on your own pages, tag people to join the conversation and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Because we want to drive the conversation. One of the reasons why I brought Floyd is because he's a friend, I know him, and I'm supportive of what he's been doing. And he does such a great job of explaining it. And again, even if you are a doubter, go to UBI Works and just read and learn. And if you have questions, including you, Doug, please ask away, because I think having the conversation is far more important than not having a conversation. So thanks for joining us, Floyd. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And everybody else, Power Connection Chat broadcast every Mondays and Fridays, Mondays and Wednesdays. Although, just an FYI, I'm actually going to be moving the show to once a week, only because it's a lot for me to do, and as you know, splits in my time during the pandemic has shrunk to 25 hours, something like that. So I'm probably move to once a week, but you can join us, and we'll be back here on Monday morning. So check it out, and if you have any questions, comment, let us know what you think about it, and I really appreciate you all joining us. So long. Have yourselves a wonderful week.
All right, backstage. So this is